Shortly after you leave Ottawa Village, heading to St Anns Mayaro, on a little hill on the bend of the road, just after the cemetery, is a tomb. Although the tomb may appear to some to be part of the cemetery, it's not part of the cemetery. The tomb is the grave of Francois Alphonse Ganteaume, who died in 1904. The year of death can still be seen on the marble that covered the tomb, although the rest of the writing is no longer discernible because of the breaking of the marble. But who was Francois Alphonse Ganteaume, and how did he come to be buried in a spot that seems to be part of a cemetery but is not part of the cemetery? In 1789, the French Revolution began in France and soon spread to the French colonies. The island of Martinique was a French colony, and the ideas of the revolution spread there. What followed was 4 years of chaos in Martinique. In 1793, the British landed in Martinique, attempting to capture the island, and many planters on the island supported the British, thinking that they would restore the king, but the British were driven off. The Ganteaume family, who owned a coffee plantation in Martinique, had been supporting the king, but the revolutionaries were now in charge. Fearing for their lives, two brothers, Nicholas Edward and Pierre Nicholas, along with their slaves, stole a boat and left during the night on the boat. The Gantaumes were planters, not sailors, and thought they would just let the wind carry them and they would arrive in Venezuela. Well, the wind and currents certainly took them south, but it did not reach Venezuela. Instead, the winds drove them ashore on the east coast of Trinidad on the beach in Mayaro. The Gantaumes, on discovering that they were not in Venezuela, wanted to continue onwards to reach Venezuela, but the people of the area convinced them to stay in Trinidad. They explained to them about the Cédula de Population, which was in force at the time, under which, if they were Catholic and willing to swear allegiance to the King of Spain, because Trinidad at the time was a Spanish colony, they would be granted land. So the Gantaumes chose to stay in Trinidad. Originally, the Gantaumes received 200 acres under the Cédula of Population. They received 200 acres of land in Mayaro. Over time, they acquired additional land so that by 1800, they had acquired approximately 600 acres of land. Originally, the Mayaro estates were planted in cotton. However, due to the prevalence of pests on the cotton estates and the rise in the price of sugar, they gradually converted the estates to growing sugar cane. Nicholas Edward had no children, while Pierre Nicholas had one son called Pierre Antoine, who, as he grew older, began to manage the estate. By 1830, the Gantaumes had acquired 2 more estates in Mayaro, which had a combined acreage of 900 acres. With the end of slavery, the Gantaumes struggled to get labor to work on these estates. And in 1845, with the arrival of the Fatal Rosac, 25 of the Indian indentured laborers who were on the Fatal Rosac were assigned to the Ganteaume estates in Mayaro. And then in 1847, they got additional Indian indentured laborers. Even with these Indian laborers, the estates struggled financially. And by 1850, they were in a bind. Their creditors filed against them for bankruptcy and moved in. And the 2 estates that had been acquired in 1830, the 900 acres, had to be sold, leaving them with the 618 acres of land, which was called Beausejour. Pierre Nicolas died at the age of 58 in 1860, but his son, Francois Alphonse Ganteaume, continued to manage the estates in Mayaro. Francois Alphonse had also bought an estate in the Naparimas called La Reunion, which I believe was in the La Romaine area. And this was a successful sugar estate. So Francois Alphonse traveled regularly between Mayaro, Port of Spain, and his La Reunion estate. This was not an easy journey in those days, involving traveling by horseback along the beaches at low tide and then through forest tracks to get to Port of Spain and then to get to La Reunion. Francois Alphonse, however, was appointed the warden of the North Naparima area. He was in charge of government business in that area. Over time, Francois Alphonse converted the Mayaro estates from sugarcane to coconut, eventually becoming the premier cocoa producing facility or coconut producing facility in that part of the country. And then in 1866, as a result of an incident that occurred in Mayaro, Francois Alphonse moved permanently to Mayaro. If you want to find out about that bacchanal, look at my other video called Murder Most Foul. With Francois Alphonse living permanently in Mayaro, the Archbishop appointed him church warden, and the governor appointed him warden for the entire area. Francois Alphonse was a very religious man, and apart from just being the church warden, he worked assiduously in helping the church. He helped with the acquisition of land for church purposes in Mayaro. He donated land for the building of the Catholic Church in Mayaro. Finally, in 1904, Francois Alphonse died. Now that you have learned who Francois Alphonse Ganteaume was, how did he come to be buried on land that seems to be part of the cemetery, but is not part of the cemetery? The answer is simple. The Gantaumes, as the owners of St. Joseph Estate, own the land that is visible from the road to the sea, but also own the land that is on the western side of the road. And in those days, you were allowed to bury persons on your estate. So Francois Alphonse Ganteaume was buried on his estate, or on the land on his estate, and that is why there is this tomb at the side of the road that seems to be part of the cemetery, but is not part of the cemetery.